A man walked out onto a frozen lake and took one more step than the world allowed him to take. There were trees under that ice. Green trees, alive, standing upright under 30 feet of water clear as glass. The snow stopped at the edge of it in a line no hand could cross. The air above it was warm at 40 below. And at evening, the whole circle began to glow. 11 rangers had seen it. 11 rangers reported it. And every one of them was gone within a single season. The maps said there was no lake there at all. The maps had been wrong since 1962. And the only man who knew what was really at the bottom of that draw had spent the whole day trying to keep me from finding it, without ever once telling me why. For those of you finding this channel for the first time, this is where we go to the places the maps run out, the country where the cold keeps its own records and does not share them. Before we go down into that draw, do me one small thing, and make sure you are still with us, still subscribed, still walking the line, and remember that the wilderness forgives almost nothing, but it always rewards the patient. Today we are going into the Toklet drainage, in the deep cold of late winter, to a basin that does not appear on any survey, to a sheet of clear ice that froze around a living forest in a single instant. We are going to follow one line of boot prints out across that ice, and we are going to find the exact place where they stop. My name does not matter. What matters is that I have read Cold for 14 winters, and I always believed that ice does not lie. I was wrong about that. And this is the story of the day I found out. I have spent 14 winters reading Cold, and the one thing I believed without question, the thing I built every decision on, is that Cold is honest. Ice does not lie. A man can lie. Weather forecasts can be wrong. But the land in deep winter does exactly what its conditions tell it to do, and if you know how to read those conditions, the land will tell you the truth every time. That belief kept me alive. It kept the people I was responsible for alive. I am telling you about it now because what I saw in late February in the Toklat drainage did not do what Cold does, and I no longer trust the one thing I built myself on. I am not building toward a ghost story. I want that understood before I go any further. I am building toward a problem I cannot solve with the tools I have, and the tools I have are good ones. They are the only thing I ever trusted. I patrol a backcountry district in interior Alaska, a stretch of black spruce and frozen muskeg and river valley that the agency manages but rarely walks in winter. Most of my work happens between October and April, when the ground is hard enough to travel and the rivers are locked and the cold does the dangerous work of sorting out who belongs in that country and who does not. I have pulled 2 bodies out of overflow ice. I have tracked a lost moose hunter for 9 miles through a ground blizzard and found him alive in a snow hollow he did not remember digging. I know the sound the river makes 3 days before the ice goes bad. I know the smell of a den that is occupied and the smell of one that has been abandoned. I know what 4 feet of settled powder does to sound and what a temperature inversion does to a man's sense of distance. These are not things I think about, they are things I am. The Toklat drainage sits in the northwest corner of my district, a long valley of black spruce running between 2 ridges, with a frozen river down the middle and side draws feeding into it from both walls. In winter it holds cold the way a bowl holds water. The inversions there can drop the valley floor to 60 below, while the ridge line above it sits at 20. I have patrolled that valley a dozen times across 14 winters. I know how the cold moves through it. I know what to expect. What I saw there did not do what cold does. The agency has me scheduled for a welfare patrol in that same grid next February. The assignment is in the rotation. I have seen it on the board. I have not asked to be taken off it. I keep returning to that, not to the lake itself. Not yet, but to the fact that I looked at the rotation and did not request a change. I could have. Transfers and reassignments inside the district are routine and processed without comment. I have requested them before for reasons that mattered far less than this. I did not request one this time. I do not know why I did not. That is the part I cannot account for. And it sits in me the way a foreign object sits in a wound, something the body wants to push out and cannot. The silence after I understood that is where this begins. The call came in at 6:40 on a Tuesday morning in late February, the 24th. I was at the district station drinking coffee that had been on the burner since 5. The dispatcher, a woman named Carol who had run winter dispatch longer than I had carried a badge, put her head into the ready room. "Welfare check," she said. "Trapper named Halloran. Runs a line up the Toklet. Wife in town has not heard from him on the scheduled radio call in 9 days. She is asking us to look." I set the coffee down. 9 days was long but not impossible. Trappers go quiet. Radios fail in the cold. Batteries die. A man can be perfectly fine and simply unable to reach anyone, but 9 days was the edge of where fine ended and something else began. And the agency does not gamble with that edge. I pulled the file. Halloran, Pete, 61 years old, registered trap line up the east wall of the Toklat drainage, cabin marked at grid 472619 on the bench above the river. I had never met the man, but I had seen his cabin marked on the district maps for years. I called for a patrol of 3. Myself, a ranger named Del Mercer who had 8 winters in, and a younger ranger named Wade Sorensen. Wade was 29, 4 winters in the district, and he had grown up in the village at the mouth of the Toklat, 15 miles downriver from where we were headed. That fact was in his file. The way the place a man grows up is always in his file, because it is one of the lines on the form. It had never meant anything to me. Plenty of my rangers came from the villages. It is steady work for people who can pass the physical and who do not mind the cold. And the ones who grow up out here are usually the best I have, because they learned to read the country before they could read a book. We loaded the snow machines at 7:30. The thermometer outside the station read 31 below. The sky was clear and hard, and the kind of blue that only happens when the air is too cold to hold any moisture. And the sun, when it came up over the eastern ridge, gave light but no heat. The plan was simple: run the river up the Toklat to the bench below Halloran's cabin, climb to the cabin, check on the man, and come back. 40 miles round trip. A long day, but not a hard one if the ice held and the machines ran. Carol radioed me before we left the yard. "Be advised," she said. "There is a note on the Toklat grid in the dispatch system. I am reading it to you because procedure says I have to." "Go ahead," I said. There was a pause. Carol did not pause. She had read me 10,000 notes over the years in a flat, steady voice that never changed, and the pause was the first thing that morning that landed wrong. "Recurring anomaly report," she said. "Grid 470 through 475. Multiple reports of an open water or clear ice feature, late winter, cause undetermined on file, advisory only, no action required." I wrote the words down in the field notebook I keep in my chest pocket. Open water, clear ice. I did not know yet why I wrote them. I underlined the word anomaly once. "Open water in late February at 60 below, I said. "That does not happen unless there is a spring or a thermal source." "I am reading you what is on file," Carol said. "That is all I have." "Copy," I said. "We will keep an eye out." We ran the river. The Toklat ice was good, thick and gray and swept clean of snow by the valley wind in long stretches, drifted deep in others. Del ran lead, I ran middle, Wade ran sweep. The machines threw rooster tails of powder where the snow was loose, and ground hard over the swept ice, and the cold came through every seam in my gear and found the skin underneath. And that was normal. That was exactly what the Toklat does. I read the valley as we climbed it, the way I always read winter country, cataloging the ice color and the overflow stains and the places where the side draws fed cold air down onto the river like water pouring off a roof. Everything I saw was a valley behaving the way a valley behaves at 30 below, under a clear sky. I was not rattled. I had no reason to be. We were about 12 miles up when Wade pulled alongside me at a wide flat stretch and signaled to stop. I cut the engine. The silence came down the way it does when 3 machines go quiet at once, sudden and total, and the only sound left was the tick of cooling metal and the faint hiss of blowing snow. "I want to take the ridge route up to the cabin," Wade said. "Not the river bench." I looked at him. His face was hidden behind his mask and goggles, only his eyes showing, and there was nothing in them I could read. The ridge route was longer and harder, a climb up the east wall through the spruce instead of the easy run up the river to the bench below the cabin. It was not a bad route. It was just not the obvious one. Any reason? I asked. Just a preference, Wade said. I looked up the valley. The ridge route would put us higher, out of the worst of the valley inversion, and it would bring us down to the cabin from above instead of below. There was nothing wrong with it. It was the choice a careful man might make on a very cold day. All right, I said. You and Dell take the ridge. I will run the bench and meet you at the cabin. Wade was quiet for a second. Then he said, I would rather we stayed together. That was the second thing that landed wrong, though I did not let it show, and I am not sure I understood it at the time. Wade had 4 winters in. He knew that splitting a patrol on a simple welfare check was standard, that we did it all the time to cover ground. But there was something in the way he said it, flat and certain, and without any of the usual deference a younger ranger gives, that made me change my plan without quite deciding to. We stay together, I said. We will all take the bench. It is faster. He did not argue. He nodded once and went back to his machine. I noted the request the way I note anything a careful person does without explanation. In 14 winters I have learned that when someone who knows the country makes a quiet, specific request and offers no reason, you do not dismiss it and you do not interrogate it, you file it. I filed it. I did not ask him why. I am still deciding whether that was the right call. I have not asked him since. We ran on up the river. The valley narrowed and the spruce thickened on both walls and the cold deepened as we climbed, the way it does when you run up into the heart of an inversion. At 20 miles, the river bent east around a long timbered point, and the bench where Halloran's cabin sat came into view above us on the north wall, a flat shelf of spruce maybe 200 feet above the river. That was where I noticed the first thing that did not fit, the smoke. There was none. A trapper living alone in a cabin at 35 below burns wood around the clock. It is not a comfort. It is survival. The stovepipe should have been showing a steady column of smoke standing straight up in the still, cold air, the way smoke stands when there is no wind to bend it. There was nothing. No smoke, no haze, no smell of wood fire on the air, which at that temperature carries for a mile. I filed it as a bad sign. A man who has been quiet for 9 days and whose chimney is cold is a man who is very likely dead, and that is a thing I have seen before and know how to handle. I did not like it, but I understood it. It was a thing cold does. We climbed to the bench. The cabin was small and well built. A single room of peeled logs with a sod roof and a covered porch on the south side, and a stovepipe rising from the center of the roof. There was a meat cache up on poles to the east, a snow machine under a tarp, a sled, a stack of split wood under the eave. Everything a careful trapper keeps. The snow around the cabin was undisturbed except for old drifted tracks, days old, softened by wind. I called out as we approached. No answer. I went up onto the porch and knocked, then opened the door. The cold inside was the same as the cold outside, which told me the stove had been out for days. The cabin was empty. The bunk was made. There was a kettle on the cold stove, and a tin cup on the table, and a kerosene lamp, unlit. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of illness, no note. A trapper's cabin, left clean and orderly, with the man gone. His parka was on the hook by the door. His outer boots were by the stove. That stopped me. No man in interior Alaska in February walks out of a cabin without his parka and his boots. To do so is to die within the hour. And a trapper of 61 years knows that better than anyone alive. I stood in the cold cabin looking at the parka on the hook, and for the first time that day I felt the small, cold weight of something I could not file. I went back outside. Dell was checking the meat cache. Wade was standing at the east edge of the bench, looking down into a side draw that fed into the valley, and he was very still. I walked over to him. The draw below us ran north, up away from the river into the high country between the two ridges, a narrow timbered cut maybe a quarter-mile wide, and about half a mile up the draw, where it widened into a basin, there was something on the valley floor that did not belong. It was a circle, perfectly round, maybe 300 yards across, and it was not white. Everything around it was buried under 4 feet of settled February powder. The spruce hung heavy with snow load. The whole world, the flat, blinding white of deep winter. But the circle was clear and dark and smooth, like a lens set into the snow, and it had no snow on it at all. There should be snow on it, Dell said. He had come up beside me without my hearing him. There is 4 feet of snow on everything in this valley. Why is there no snow on that? I did not answer. I pulled the binoculars from my chest and looked. The circle was ice, clear ice, black ice, the kind that forms on still water in a hard freeze before any snow falls. Except that it was late February, and there had been snow on the ground in that country since the end of September. There was no reason for a sheet of bare, clear ice to exist anywhere in that valley, let alone a perfect circle of it 300 yards wide with 4 feet of snow stopping at its edge as though someone had drawn a line. We should look at it, Wade said. I lowered the binoculars and looked at him. There had been nothing in his voice. Not curiosity, not fear. Just a statement, the way you state a thing that is already decided. We are here for Halloran, I said. Halloran is not in the cabin, Wade said. And his parka is on the hook. He was right, and I did not like that he was right, and I did not like the flat certainty with which he said it. But a missing man and an anomaly on file in the same grid is not a coincidence I had the luxury of ignoring. If Halloran had walked out of his cabin without his parka, he had walked somewhere, and the only thing in that valley that did not belong was half a mile up the draw. We will look at it, I said. On foot. Leave the machines. Dell, you stay on the radio and keep the cabin in sight. Wade, you are with me. If you are still finding value in stories like this one, the kind that come from the country where the maps run out, take a moment to follow along before we go down into that draw, because what we found at the edge of that ice is the part I have never been able to put into a report. We dropped down into the draw on snowshoes. The snow was deep and dry and squeaked under the webs at that temperature. A high, tight sound that is the most ordinary sound in the world to me, and I held on to it the way you hold onto a handrail. The draw was steep at first, then leveled into the basin, and as we came down onto the flat, the spruce closed in around us and the light went gray and the cold settled heavier, and I began to notice the things that did not fit. The first was the sound. A draw that deep in that timbered hold sound the way a room holds it. You hear your own breathing come back to you off the trees. The squeak of the snowshoes doubled and softened. A kind of close acoustic pocket that is so familiar I do not normally register it. This draw was not holding anything. The sound of our snowshoes went out from us and did not come back. My own breathing was flat in my ears with no resonance behind it. It was like walking in a room with no walls, except the walls were right there. The spruce standing thick on both sides, hung heavy with snow. The second was the cold. As we came down toward the basin, the cold did not deepen. It should have. We were dropping into the lowest part of the draw, into the bottom of the inversion, where the coldest air pools and sits. The temperature should have been falling with every step. Instead it held, and then as we got closer to the circle, it began to ease. Not by much, by just enough to be wrong. I could feel it on the exposed skin around my eyes, a softening, a place where the bite of the air pulled back. I have spent 14 winters learning to read temperature with my skin the way other people read it off a thermometer. And my skin was telling me that the closer we got to that ice, the warmer the air became, and there was no source for it, no spring, no vent, no open water. Just a circle of clear ice radiating a warmth it had no right to have. I stopped about 50 yards out and pulled the map. I had the district topographic sheet and I spread it against my thigh and found the grid. 471620. The basin was on the map. The draw was on the map. There was no lake on the map, no water feature of any kind. The basin floor was marked as muskeg, frozen bog, the same as 100 other basins in that country. I checked the date on the map. It was 4 years old. I folded it and put it away, and we went on. We came to the edge. I have stood on a lot of ice. I know first ice and rotten ice and overflow ice and the gray pressure ice of a big river. I know what a lake looks like under clear ice in early winter. The trapped bubbles, the white feathering of frost crystals on the underside, the slow milky clouding as the season goes on. This ice was none of those things. It was clear all the way down, perfectly clear. Like glass, like the air itself had simply hardened. And through it I could see the bottom, and the bottom was wrong in a way that took me a long moment to understand, because my mind kept trying to make it into something it knew. There were trees under the ice, black spruce, a whole stand of them, standing fully upright, their branches spread, their needles green. Not dead trees, not drowned timber gone gray and bare the way trees go when a beaver pond floods them out. Living trees, green and full, standing on the bottom of a clear frozen lake the way they would stand in a forest, except that they were under 30 or 40 feet of ice that was clear as glass, and the light that came down through the ice lit them green and still, and not one needle moved, because there was no water moving down there, because the whole thing was frozen solid from the surface to the bottom, frozen around a living forest as though the water had turned to ice in a single instant and caught the trees mid-breath. Wade stood beside me at the edge. He was looking down through the ice at the trees, and his face was bare now, his mask pulled down, and there was no surprise in it, none. He was looking at the trees the way you look at something you have seen before, or something you were told to expect. "Do not step on it," he said. I had not been going to, but the way he said it, low and quick and certain, told me he had thought about it, that the warning was for something he knew and I did not. "How long has this been here?" I said. "I do not know," Wade said, "but you knew it was here." He did not answer. He kept looking at the trees. I crouched at the edge of the ice. The snow stopped at the boundary in a clean line. 4 feet of powder dropping straight down to bare clear ice, with no transition, no scatter of wind-blown snow across the surface. Nothing, as though the snow could not cross the line. I took my glove off and held my bare hand flat above the ice, an inch off the surface, and I felt warmth come up off it. Not heat, warmth. The warmth of a room, of a body, of something alive, coming up off a sheet of ice in a frozen basin at 35 below. And I pulled my hand back and put my glove on, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the cold I had built my life on could explain. I keyed my radio. "Dell, this is Harlan. You copy." "Copy," Dell said. His voice came through with a strange flatness, the radio struggling in the cold or in something else. "I need a records check on a feature in grid 471620. A frozen lake, circular, roughly 300 yards across. There is no lake marked on my map. I want to know what dispatch has." "Copy," Dell said. "Stand by." Wade and I stood at the edge of the ice and waited. The warmth came up off the surface. The trees stood green and still beneath us. Nothing moved in that basin. Not a bird, not a branch, not a breath of wind. And the silence did not echo, and I understood that I was standing in a place where the rules I knew did not apply, and the only thing I could do was wait for a voice on a radio to give me something to hold on to. It took 20 minutes. When Carol came back, her voice was careful, in the same way it had been that morning. "Harlan, dispatch. I have something. You want me to read it?" "Go ahead," I said. "There is no lake on file for that grid," she said. "No water feature, no survey record, no notation on any current map. Grid is managed as roadless wilderness, frozen muskeg." "Copy," I said. "Anything else?" A pause. "There is a recurring report," she said. "You want me to read it?" "Read it." Another pause. Longer. "Reported open water or clear ice anomaly in that grid. Late winter, 11 of the last 15 winters. Each report investigated. Each closed with cause undetermined. There is a second notation under it." "What is the second notation?" She did not answer right away. "Carol," I said. "What is the second notation?" "Each reporting ranger transferred out of the district within the following season," she said. "That is what it says. I did not write it. I am reading it to you." I did not say anything. Wade had gone very still beside me. "You want me to read that again?" Carol said. "Yes," I said. She read it again. The words did not change. 11 winters. 11 reports. Cause undetermined. Every ranger who saw it, gone within the year. "Copy," I said. "Harlan out." I clipped the radio back to my chest and stood there with the notation in my ear and the trees green under my feet. 11 rangers had stood where I was standing, over 15 winters, and looked down at this same impossible thing, and reported it, and within a season every one of them had left the district. Not been fired, not died, as far as the record showed, transferred, moved on, gone somewhere else, away from this grid. I looked at Wade. He was watching me. He knew what the radio had said. He had heard it the same as I had. 4 winters, I said. You have 4 winters in this district. You grew up 15 miles down that river. You knew this was here. I had heard about it, Wade said. That was all he said. From who? He looked back down at the trees. From people who do not write things in reports, he said. What did they tell you? That you do not step on it, Wade said. And you do not stay past dark. It was the closest thing to an answer he gave me. And it was not an answer at all. I looked up. The sun was already low over the western ridge, the brief February day burning down toward its end. We had maybe 2 hours of light. The drive back down the river was 3 hours minimum, and the last hour of it would be in the failing gray light of an Alaska winter evening, and Halloran was still missing. I started to walk the edge of the ice. Wade said my name, low, a warning. But I kept the binoculars up and stayed back from the boundary and worked my way clockwise around the circle, looking for anything, a sign, a track, a reason a man would walk out of his cabin without his parka. The far side of the circle backed up against the steep north wall of the basin, where the spruce climbed up toward the high country. And on the north side, where the snow met the ice at that clean, impossible line, I saw them. Tracks, boot tracks, pressed into the snow at the very edge of the ice. Fresh, sharp-edged, the way tracks are only when the snow is cold and dry and has not had time to wind soften. Which meant recent, which meant days at most, maybe less. I crouched beside the nearest one. A man's boot, a heavy felt pack boot, the kind a trapper wears, the kind that had been sitting by the cold stove in Halloran's cabin, except those had been his outer boots and a man might keep a second pair. The tracks came down out of the spruce on the north wall, crossed the snow to the edge of the ice, and then they went out onto the ice itself, onto the clear ice. I could see them, faint impressions on that glassy surface where the felt soles had pressed down some thin frost, leading out across the circle toward the center, toward the place where the trees stood thickest beneath the surface. They walked straight. That was the thing. No man walks straight across 30 feet of clear ice over a drowned forest, looking down at green trees under his feet. A man hesitates, stops, crouches, looks. These tracks did none of that. They went out in a straight line, evenly spaced, the stride of a man walking steadily toward a fixed point. And I followed them with the binoculars out across the ice, and about a third of the way to the center they stopped. Not at anything. Not at a hole. Not at a crack. Not at an obstacle. They stopped in the middle of the clear ice, mid-stride. The last full print was a left boot, planted flat. Ahead of it, where the right boot should have come down, the frost was unbroken. He had taken a step and not finished it. The right foot had lifted and never come back down, and there was nothing past that point. No tracks, no mark, no sign that a man weighing 200 pounds had ever continued across that ice. And there was no hole he could have gone through, because the ice was whole and clear and unbroken all the way to the center, and all the way down to the green trees, frozen solid, no opening anywhere in it. I lowered the binoculars. I felt the cold weight in my chest spread out. Wade had come up beside me. He was looking at the tracks too. That is Halloran, I said. It was not a question. I think so, Wade said. He walked out onto it, I said. And then he was not there anymore. Wade did not say anything. I have stood at the edge of a lot of bad places in 14 winters. Crevasses, overflow, rotten river ice. I know the feeling of standing at the edge of something that will kill you if you take one more step. The way the body knows before the mind does. The way the legs lock and the stomach drops. I had that feeling standing at the edge of that ice, except it was worse. Because every bad place I had ever stood at the edge of had been a thing I understood. A crevasse is a hole in a glacier. Overflow is water under snow. Rotten ice is ice that has gone bad in a thaw. I knew what those things were and why they were dangerous and how they would kill me if I was careless. I did not know what this was. I did not know why a man had walked out onto solid, clear ice and ceased to exist in the middle of his own footprints. I did not know why the air was warm, or why the sound did not echo, or why 11 Rangers had seen this and left the district within a year. I was standing at the edge of something that would kill me, and I had no framework for how. And that absence, that hole where my knowledge should have been, was the most frightening thing I have ever felt. "We have to go," Wade said. "The light." I looked at the sky. The sun was gone behind the ridge now. The light had gone to the flat blue-gray of evening, the snow holding a faint glow, the spruce going to silhouette. The temperature, which had eased near the ice, was dropping again as the day ended, the cold coming back down into the basin like water filling a bowl. "You do not stay past dark," Wade had said. People who do not write things in reports had told him that. I keyed the radio. "Del, this is Harlan. We are coming out. Get the machines warmed up. We are running for home." "What about Halloran?" Del said. I looked at the last footprint out on the ice. The left boot planted. The right foot lifted into nothing. "Halloran is gone," I said. "We will file it as a disappearance. We are leaving." "Copy," Del said. And then, after a pause, "Harlan, the light up there, on the ice. Are you seeing the light?" I turned. I had been looking at the tracks, at the radio, at the sky. I had not been looking at the ice itself, and now that the day was failing and the basin had gone to evening gray, I saw what Del, half a mile away at the cabin, had seen before I did. The ice was glowing, not reflecting, glowing. A faint green light was coming up through the clear ice from below, from the trees, the same green as the needles, soft and even, and rising from the whole surface of the circle at once. 300 yards of ice giving off a low green light into the gathering evening, and the trees beneath the surface stood in it, green and lit and still, and the light did not flicker and it did not waver, and it had edges, a clean round boundary at the edge of the ice where the glow stopped and the gray snow began. I have seen the things that glow in the winter night. I have seen the aurora, the green and red curtains of it filling the whole sky. I have seen foxfire, the cold light of rot in old wood. I have seen the false dawn and the ice fog catching the last light. I know what those things are and why they glow. This was none of them. This was a frozen lake giving off the green light of the living trees inside it, and it was getting brighter as the day died, as though the light had been there all along, and the failing of the sun was only now letting me see it. Wade had me by the arm. "We are going," he said. Now, we went. We climbed out of the basin on the snowshoes, fast, the breath tearing in my chest. And behind us the green light rose off the ice and lit the underside of the spruce and threw our shadows up the snow ahead of us. 3 shadows, mine and Wade's, and a third that I told myself was a trick of the doubled light, and did not look back to confirm. We came up out of the draw onto the bench where the cabin sat, and Del had the machines running, 3 plumes of exhaust standing in the still cold air. And we did not stop. We got on and we ran. I looked back once, from the bench, before we dropped down to the river. The basin below was a bowl of gathering evening, the spruce gone to black shapes, and in the center of it the circle of ice burned a soft, steady green, lighting the trees inside it, and at the very center of the circle where the trees stood thickest, there was a point of light that was not green. It was yellow, small and steady and warm, the color of a kerosene lamp burning in a window. It had not been there when we stood at the edge. It was there now. I did not point it out to Del or Wade. I turned my machine downriver and I ran, and I did not look back again. We made the river in the last of the light, and ran the 40 miles home in the full cold of the winter night. The headlights throwing a white cone ahead of us, the temperature down to 40 below on the valley floor, and none of us spoke on the radio the whole way except for the flat necessary calls of a patrol moving in the cold. We reached the station at 9:40. Del killed his machine and went inside without a word. Wade killed his machine and stood beside it for a moment, looking at me across the yard in the yellow light of the station floods. And then he went inside too. I sat on my machine in the cold for a while before I followed. The report sat on my desk the next morning. I have filed reports on disappearances before. The form is automatic to me. Name, last known location, last contact, conditions, search conducted, disposition. I pulled it up and I started to fill it in. And the language came the way it always comes. Subject Halloran, Pete, age 61. found absent from registered cabin in Tocklet drainage. Subject's parka and outer boots present in cabin. Search of immediate area conducted. Subject not located. Tracks observed leading from cabin area toward basin to the north. Tracks terminate. Subject presumed deceased due to exposure. Recommend case closed pending spring recovery. It was true. Every word of it was true. And it said nothing. It did not say that the tracks terminated in the middle of a sheet of clear ice over a living forest. It did not say that the ice was warm. It did not say that the basin held no echo, or that the snow stopped at the edge of the ice in a line a hand could not cross, or that 11 rangers had seen the same thing and left within a year, or that the ice had glowed green at evening with a yellow lamp burning at its center where no lamp could be. It did not say that I had stood at the edge of a thing my 14 winters had no name for, and that I had turned and run from it like a Green Ranger in his first season, because running was the only correct response and I had known it in my body before my mind caught up. I wrote that the tracks terminated. I did not write where. I signed it. The pen felt heavier than a pen should feel. I filed it with dispatch and I made one request, that the historical survey records for that grid be pulled for terrain analysis. Standard enough that no one would ask why. They said they would pull what they had. I went back to work. There is always work. I ran a welfare check down the Kontishna on Thursday and helped recover a stranded musher on Friday, and both of those things did exactly what cold does, and I held onto them the way you hold onto a railing on bad ice. I came back to the station Saturday evening and the records request was still pending. Monday morning, the survey records came up from the regional archive in a thin folder. I opened it at my desk. There was a single aerial photograph inside, black and white. The grain coarse, the contrast hard. The date stamp in the corner read March 2nd, 1962. Survey flight, regional mapping project. I looked at it for a long time before I read the notation on the back. The photograph showed the basin. I could see the draw, the north wall, the place where the spruce climbed toward the high country. And in the center of the basin, against the gray of the frozen muskeg, there was a circle. Perfectly round, darker than the snow around it. The same circle. In 1962, 63 years before I stood at its edge, the circle was already there. The same shape, the same place, the same impossible clean boundary against the snow. The notation was typed on a slip of paper clipped to the back of the photograph. Anomalous clear ice feature. Grid 471. No water source identified. Feature not present on previous survey. Cause undetermined. Not present on previous survey. The circle had not always been there. At some point between two survey flights, in the early 1960s, it had appeared, and it had been appearing every late winter since, and it had been there last Tuesday, and a man had walked out onto it and vanished in the middle of his own footsteps, and I had stood at the edge of it and felt warmth come up off the ice and seen green light rise through it at evening. And I had filed a report that said the tracks terminated and nothing more. I set the photograph down. I sat in the records room with the fluorescent light humming and I understood what I had been looking at. Not what it was, I will never know what it is, but what it was doing. The lake was not a place. It was an event that kept happening. It came back every late winter to the same grid, the way the cold comes back, the way the river freezes back, except that the cold and the river are conditions and this was something else. Something that wore the shape of a frozen lake the way a thing might wear a coat. It froze around the living forest, and it held the warmth and the silence and the green light inside its boundary. And at the edge of it the snow could not cross and the sound could not echo. And at evening it lit up and showed what it was. And a man who walked out onto it did not fall through. Because there was nothing to fall through, he simply stopped being in the place where men are. 11 rangers had seen it and reported it and left. They had not left because they were transferred. They had left because they had stood where I stood and understood, the way I understood now, that they had seen a thing that did not fit inside the world they knew how to read, and they could not stay in a district that contained it. The transfer was the symptom. The understanding was the cause, and Wade had known, not guessed, known. He had asked to take the ridge route to keep us out of the draw. And when I overruled him, he had asked to stay together, And when we found Halloran gone, he had said, "Look at the ice," with no surprise in his voice, and he had warned me not to step on it before I had any reason to. And he had said, "You do not stay past dark." And he had pulled me out of that basin by the arm when the green light came up. He grew up 15 miles down that river. People who do not write things in reports had told him what the grid was, the way the people of a country always know the things the maps do not say. He had come into that draw already knowing what was at the bottom of it, and he had spent the whole day trying to keep us out of it without ever saying why, because there was no way to say why that I would have believed before I saw it. I could call him. He lived 20 minutes from the station. I could call him and ask what the people in his village said about that grid, how long they had known, what they thought it was, whether they had a name for it, whether Halloran was the first man it had taken, or only the first I knew about. I could ask him why he had not just refused the assignment, why he had come at all, knowing what he knew. I did not reach for the phone. I pulled the photograph back in front of me and looked at the circle, dark and round and perfect against the gray snow of 1962. 63 years. The circle had not changed. It had been there before I was born. It would be there after I was gone. It comes back every late winter to the same grid, and it holds its forest and its warmth and its silence and its green light, and once in a while a man walks out onto it and stops being in the world, and the record closes the case with cause undetermined, and the ranger who saw it leaves the district within the year, except that I have not left. I have not requested a transfer. I checked, the way I check everything now. The assignment for next February in that grid is still in the rotation, and I have not asked to be taken off it, and I do not know why. I have requested transfers for far less. I did not request one this time. That choice sits in me like the foreign object I told you about, and I can feel its edges and I cannot remove it. Wade has not requested a transfer either. I checked that too. He is still in the district. He has not volunteered anything more about the grid, and I have not asked him, and we have not spoken about that day at all, and I do not think we ever will. We pass each other in the ready room, and we run patrols together, and we do not look at each other longer than we have to, the way men do not look at each other when they have stood at the edge of the same thing, and have no language for it. I do not know what I expect to find in February. The circle will be there. The forest will be standing green under the ice. The basin will hold no echo. Maybe there will be tracks at the edge, and maybe there will not. Maybe the case file will have another name in it by then. Another man who walked out onto the ice. Another report that says the tracks terminate and nothing more. I have no framework for any of it. I do not think a framework exists. 14 winters of believing that cold is honest, that ice does not lie, that the land in deep winter does exactly what its conditions tell it to do, and the thing I keep coming back to is not the trees under the ice, or the tracks that stopped mid-stride, or the warmth that came up off a frozen surface at 40 below. It is the green light, the way it rose up through the ice at evening, even and steady and edged, from a forest that should have been dead and was not, under a lake that should not have existed and did, and the yellow point of light at the center, small and warm and steady, the color of a lamp burning in a window where there was no window and no lamp and no one to light it. The ice was glowing green and the light was alive and it had no source. And I have built 14 winters on the certainty that nothing in the cold happens without a source. I have no framework for a light with no source. I do not think one exists. I am going back in February. I am aware that this is not a sufficient reason. The circle will be there, and I will stand at its edge, and I will look down at the green trees standing still under 30 feet of clear ice, and I will feel the warmth come up off the surface in air that should freeze the breath in my chest, and I will wait for the day to fail and the green light to rise, because the light had no source, and I have not found a way to live with that, and I do not think I will. I am going anyway. I usually finish my shift after everyone else is already asleep. So walking my dog Ren under the dim suburban glow had become routine. That night, the street shone with leftovers from a recent rain, creating silvery puddles that splintered the yard lights into shards of glare. It was that familiar Texas suburb, family homes in neat rows, the sort of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. But the reflections bouncing off the wet pavement gave everything an odd haze. I kept squinting, trying to figure out if my eyes were just tired, or if the gleaming lights truly made it harder to see anything beyond their reach. The neighborhood was hushed. No other dog walkers were around. No cars rolling by. Just Wren and me. Wren was this sweet, laid-back companion, barely raising an eyebrow at squirrels, let alone strangers. Normally that was comforting. Tonight, though, his calm demeanor only emphasized how alone we were. The houses stood dark, their windows like empty eyes watching us pass. I noticed details I'd never paid attention to before. The way shadows pooled beneath parked cars, how the spaces between houses created tunnels of darkness that seemed to breathe with unseen movement. My footsteps echoed against the wet asphalt, each sound bouncing off garage doors and returning to me distorted. The air hung heavy with moisture and something else. That electric feeling before a storm, though the sky remained clear. I pulled my jacket tighter, not from cold, but from an inexplicable need for protection. My mind started to drift into darker corners, wondering how safe we really were. We kept moving along that narrow road, with no sidewalks, hugging the edge whenever I heard the distant possibility of a car. Tonight, though, there was no hint of an engine. My thoughts wandered. I caught myself gazing up at the stars one moment, then scanning the dark lawns for any sign of life the next. That was when I spotted some shape, shadowy and distant, far up ahead. It could have been anything. The way the street lights played tricks with perspective made it impossible to judge distance or size at first. The figure seemed to materialize from the darkness itself, as if the shadows had suddenly decided to take human form. Maybe a trick of the light. But I knew I wasn't imagining it when it seemed to inch closer. The movement was wrong somehow. Too smooth, too deliberate. Most people walking at night have a purpose. Heading home, walking a pet, getting exercise. This figure moved with the patience of someone who had nowhere to be, nothing but time. Despite my pulse kicking up, I told myself it was probably just a neighbor. No big deal, right? I couldn't turn around anyway, or I'd risk having this person behind me for the rest of my walk. The thought of being followed sent ice through my veins. Better to face whatever this was head on. So onward I went, staying near the curb with Wren snuffling at every mailbox post. The figure looked tall, and as we got nearer, I noticed they wore glasses. The glow of the yard lights reflected off the lenses, revealing the slightest flicker each time they shifted. That reflection was weirdly hypnotic, like two little mirrors aimed my way. I tried not to stare, but something about those glasses drew my attention. They seemed oversized, almost theatrical, catching and throwing back every available photon of light. The face behind them remained obscured, features lost in shadow despite the ambient glow. Only those twin reflections existed, floating in the darkness like disembodied eyes. The next overhead street lamp was a good stretch down the road, leaving a big patch of gloom between us. In those few seconds of partial darkness, I realized how quiet the figure was. No phone in hand, no shuffle of feet on gravel, nothing. Most people make noise when they walk. Keys jingling, clothes rustling, breath visible in the humid night air. This person moved in complete silence, as if they'd practiced the art of being unnoticed. I could hear my own breathing now, quick and shallow. Wren's collar tags clinked softly with each step. But from the approaching figure, nothing. Not even the scrape of shoes on pavement. I braced myself, half expecting a greeting or nod. That moment never arrived. Wren perked up. This was unusual. He barely reacted to strangers. His body went rigid beneath my hand, muscles bunching under his fur. A low growl started deep in his chest, something I'd never heard from him before. The leash went taut in my grip. We were nearly side by side when the figure stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The person stood perhaps 6 feet away, close enough that I should have been able to make out features, clothing details, something. But all I could focus on were those glasses, now perfectly still, aimed directly at me. Without a word, this person started to move in reverse, every step aligning with mine as if we were dancing to some silent beat. The movement was impossibly smooth, heel to toe in perfect reverse, maintaining that exact distance between us. No stumbling, no glancing back to check footing. Just that steady, unnatural backward glide. Ren, normally my gentle buddy, erupted in barks, straining so hard that I nearly lost my balance. The sound shattered the suburban quiet, echoing off houses and setting off a distant dog somewhere blocks away. But the figure never flinched, never acknowledged the noise. Just kept that backward pace, those reflective lenses never wavering from my face. My thoughts careened from embarrassment over my suddenly feral-sounding dog to a sharper dread pulsing at the edges of my mind. The stranger had no dog, no friendly wave, just a silent backward pace, keeping that reflective stare locked on me. I couldn't pin down what felt more unsettling, Ren's fierce reaction, or the steady way the stranger retreated, never breaking eye contact from behind those lenses. In that instant, the streetlights seemed dimmer, the houses too still. Every window appeared dark, every porch light suddenly inadequate. The familiar neighborhood transformed into something alien, a stage set for nightmares. I gripped Ren's leash with trembling hands, not sure whether to shout or just keep moving. The only thing I knew for certain was that every inch of me wanted to get out of there, fast. My legs felt heavy, like moving through water. The figure continued its backward progression, matching my speed exactly. When I slowed, it slowed. When I quickened my pace, it did the same. We were locked in this grotesque dance, and I had no idea how to break free. I wasn't about to wait there, locked in that disturbing standoff with the stranger who glided backward like some silent puppet. My eyes landed on a brighter intersection a short distance away, lit by scattered porch bulbs and the faint glow of passing headlights. Without a second thought, I tugged on Ren's leash and practically lunged in that direction. He resisted at first, barking, as though unwilling to let this bizarre threat out of his sight. It took a few harsh pulls before he followed, both of us stumbling onto the better-lit side road. The sudden shift from dark to light made my eyes ache. I looked back, searching for any glimpse of the stranger, but the gloomy stretch of houses seemed deserted. Either he'd melted into the shadows, or my nerves were wound so tight that I just couldn't see clearly. The spot where we'd had our encounter looked ordinary now, just another patch of suburban street. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. The wrongness of it clung to me like cobwebs. Ren whined, ears pinned forward, still keyed up like something wasn't right. His hackles remained raised, and he kept looking back the way we'd come. Animals know things we don't, sense dangers our civilized minds dismiss. If Ren was still afraid, I had every reason to be terrified. My grip on his leash was damp with sweat, and I kept expecting to spot a silhouette lurking behind a mailbox or creeping around the corner. Every shadow seemed to move. Every dark space between houses held potential threat. The normal sounds of night, crickets, distant traffic, the hum of air conditioners, all seemed muffled, as if the world held its breath. All I wanted at that point was the safe familiarity of home. Every time a branch rustled or a night bird called, I nearly jumped. A cat darted across the street ahead, and I bit back a scream. My rational mind tried to assert control, reminding me that I was in my own neighborhood, surrounded by sleeping families in their beds. But terror has its own logic, and mine insisted that danger still lurked nearby. There was no one to call out to, no friendly face peeking through a window. The houses might as well have been empty shells, facades with nothing behind them. Just a few blocks more, I thought. A few more blocks, and I could slam my door shut against whatever madness I'd just witnessed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to catch a flicker of those reflective glasses in the distance. Instead, all I saw were wet driveways and dim silhouettes of parked cars. But the feeling persisted. That crawling certainty of being watched, evaluated, measured for some purpose I couldn't fathom. My house felt impossibly far away, but after what seemed like forever, I spotted my porch light. The familiar sight should have brought relief, but instead, it highlighted how exposed I was in that final stretch. The last 100 yards to safety felt like miles. Normally that soft glow was comforting in an everyday sort of way, but tonight it felt like a beacon. Ren pulled ahead, eager to get inside as well. He wasn't calm yet, and honestly, neither was I. By the time I reached the front door, my hands were shaking so badly that I had to fumble with my keys a few times before I managed to fit one into the lock. When the door clicked open, I nearly burst through, dragging Ren in behind me. I flicked on every lamp I could reach, then flipped them off again when I realized how exposed the bright windows might make me. Then I reversed my choice. Darkness felt even more vulnerable. I settled for a single table lamp in the living room, just enough to see what I was doing. I spent the next hour perched on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, debating whether to call someone, anyone, and explain. But what would I say? That a strange man freaked me out by walking in reverse? It sounded ridiculous, yet the dread felt so real. The physical symptoms, racing heart, sweaty palms, that hollow feeling in my stomach, all testified to genuine terror. Sleep was out of the question. Even after I finally managed to shut off the lights and make my way to bed, I kept imagining footsteps crunching on gravel outside my window. Each settling of the house, every creak and groan of wood adjusting to temperature changes, sent fresh waves of panic through me. By morning, the sun spilled in through the blinds, painting everything in warm, normal hues. The terror felt distant, almost unreal, as though my mind had conjured it in the darkness. I made coffee with unsteady hands, trying to rationalize what had happened. But rationalization crumbled when I looked at Ren, saw the way he still watched the windows with unusual alertness. I never did see the figure again. Still, each evening afterward, whenever I took Ren out, I caught myself scanning the end of every street, looking for a tall silhouette, maybe a glint of glasses. The familiar route became a gauntlet of anxiety. I started varying my schedule, taking different streets, anything to avoid that particular stretch of road. And if I so much as glimpsed any shape in the distance, my chest tightened in an instant. Other dog walkers became sources of suspicion until they passed with normal greetings. Joggers approaching from behind made me grip Ren's leash tighter. The neighborhood I'd called home for years had transformed into a landscape of potential threats. That's the thing about terror. It clings to you, even long after your doorstep is locked up tight, like it's prowling just behind the places where the light stops. It changes you, makes you see danger in the ordinary, makes you question whether the safety you once took for granted ever really existed at all. And on quiet nights, when the streetlights cast their familiar glow on wet pavement, I remember those reflecting glasses, and wonder if somewhere out there, that figure still walks backward through the darkness, waiting for another late-night encounter. When I think back to that summer of 2018, I can still feel the weight of the forest pressing down on me. The thick, humid air carrying a silence that didn't feel right. My uncle's cabin sat miles away from anything resembling civilization, tucked deep into the woods where the trees grew too close together, and the dirt road in was more crater than path. It wasn't the kind of place you found yourself accidentally. You had to want to be there, or in my case, have no choice. I was 15 then, old enough to understand that this wasn't a vacation but more of a punishment. My parents had shipped me off to spend 3 weeks with my uncle after what they called the incident at school. My younger siblings, Grace and Sam, had been dragged along, probably to keep me from feeling completely isolated. Grace was 13, all sharp elbows and sharper tongue, while Sam, barely 11, still believed in monsters under the bed. How ironic that would prove to be. The cabin itself was a relic from another era, built sometime in the 1960s when people still thought isolation was romantic rather than terrifying. The wooden walls were thick with decades of varnish, dark and heavy, and the windows were small, letting in just enough light to remind you outside world existed. Inside, everything smelled of pine and something else, something musty and old that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. My cousin Vincent had arrived the day before us. He was 17, confident in that way that only comes from never having your world truly shaken. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy smile that made adults trust him immediately, Vincent had always been the golden child of the family. Where I was awkward and prone to trouble, he was smooth and reliable. The kind of person who could talk his way out of anything, or so we thought. That first evening, as we unpacked our bags in the stifling heat, Vincent laid down the rules for our stay. The forest was ours to explore, he said, but there were boundaries. The creek to the east was safe for swimming, though the current could be tricky. The old logging trail to the north led to a clearing where we could play games. But the area past the hollow tree was off limits, absolutely forbidden. The hollow tree stood like a monument at the edge of a small clearing, its trunk wide enough for all four of us to hide behind at once. Its bark was scarred with deep grooves that looked too deliberate to be natural, like someone or something had clawed at it over the years. The inside of the tree was hollowed out, creating a dark cave that seemed to swallow light. Vincent told us it marked the property line, and we weren't supposed to go beyond it because of the steep ravine on the other side. But even then, watching the way his eyes avoided the tree when he spoke, I could tell there was something he wasn't saying. The way his voice dropped when he mentioned it, the quick glance he shot toward the tree line, the slight tremor in his hands, all of it suggested that the ravine wasn't the real reason we needed to stay away. Our days fell into a routine quickly. Mornings were spent helping with chores around the cabin. Afternoons were ours to explore. And evenings we'd sit on the porch, listening to Vincent tell stories about the woods. He had an endless supply of tales of long years and forgotten subjects, of hunters who got lost in the motionless layer of the but it was the games that really drew us together. Vincent had a talent for making everything feel like an adventure, even something as simple as hide and seek. He'd set elaborate rules, create complex scenarios, and turn our play into epic quests that could last for hours. Grace and Sam adored him, hanging on his every word, and I found myself drawn in despite my usual teenage cynicism. Hide and seek was our favorite game, partly because the forest provided such perfect hiding spots. Fallen logs created natural shelters. Thick undergrowth could conceal a person completely, and the varying elevations meant you could disappear into a depression in the ground and become invisible. Vincent was always the hardest to find, seeming to vanish into the forest itself, while Sam was hopeless at staying quiet, always giving himself away with giggles or the rustling of leaves. But there was an unspoken understanding about the boundaries. We might venture farther from the cabin during the day, but we always stayed well away from the hollow tree. It stood there at the edge of our playground, a constant reminder that our freedom had limits. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it, wondering what lay beyond. But Vincent's warnings echoed in my head, and I never quite worked up the courage to investigate. The forest around the cabin was alive during the day, filled with the sounds of birds and insects, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Squirrels chattered in the trees, woodpeckers drummed against dead bark, and somewhere in the distance, you could always hear the gentle murmur of the creek. It felt safe, normal, the kind of place where children could play without worry. But as the sun began to set each day, something changed. The sounds would fade, one by one, until an unnatural quiet settled over everything. The birds would stop singing, the insects would fall silent, and even the ever-present buzz of mosquitoes would disappear. It was during these evening hours that the forest felt different, heavier, as though it was holding its breath. The evening that changed everything started like all the others. The sun was sinking low, turning the sky a dusky orange, and the woods were beginning their nightly transformation from welcoming playground to something more ominous. Vincent suggested we play one last game of hide and seek before heading inside, and as usual, I volunteered to be the seeker. I didn't mind the role. There was something satisfying about the hunt, the methodical process of searching every potential hiding spot. I positioned myself against the old oak tree near the cabin, squeezing my eyes shut and beginning the familiar countdown. 1, 2, 3. My voice echoed slightly in the clearing, and I could hear the others scattering, their footsteps growing fainter as they sought their hiding places. The forest seemed to lean in around me as I counted, the shadows growing longer and deeper with each passing second. 18, 19, 20. Ready or not, here I come. I opened my eyes and immediately felt that first prickle of unease. The forest had gone quiet, too quiet. The usual evening sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the gentle creaking of branches, all of it had vanished. It was just me and the sound of my own breathing, sharp and loud in the unnatural silence. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to the natural nervousness that always came with being alone as darkness approached. The game had to go on, and I had a reputation to maintain as the family's most persistent seeker. I started with the obvious spots first, the fallen log where Sam liked to hide, the cluster of thick bushes where Grace often crouched, but both spots were empty, not even a sign that someone had been there recently. Moving deeper into the forest, I called out their names, my voice seeming to fall flat against the trees. Grace, Sam, Vincent. The silence that followed was absolute, as though the forest had absorbed my words completely. I found Sam first, his bright red sneakers giving him away from behind a boulder. He emerged with his usual grin, but I noticed his eyes darting nervously toward the darkening trees. Grace was trickier, tucked into the hollow of an old tree root, but a flash of her yellow t-shirt caught my eye. She crawled out, brushing dirt from her clothes, but like Sam, she seemed on edge, constantly looking over her shoulder. "Where's Vincent?" she whispered, and I realized that in all my searching, I hadn't found a single trace of our cousin. "Vincent!" I called, louder this time, my voice carrying further into the darkening woods. No response. The three of us stood there in the growing gloom, the familiar forest suddenly feeling vast and threatening around us. We searched for Vincent for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. The sun had almost disappeared, leaving us with just the pale light filtering through the canopy. Sam was getting scared, staying close to my side and jumping at every small sound. Grace was trying to maintain her usual tough facade, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Vincent!" we called in unison, our voices creating an eerie chorus that seemed to bounce back from the trees wrong, distorted somehow. The hollow tree loomed ahead of us, its dark opening like a mouth in the twilight. We'd avoided it all week, but now it seemed like the only place left to search. "Maybe he's hiding behind it," Grace suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. We approached slowly, our feet crackling on the dried leaves and fallen branches. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, and the shadows around the tree were deeper, more absolute than they should have been. As we drew closer, I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye. There, standing just beyond the hollow tree, was a figure. My heart leaped with relief. "Vincent!" I called out, starting to run toward him. But something made me stop. Some instinct that screamed danger. The figure was the right height, the right build, but something was wrong with the way it stood. Too rigid, too still, like a mannequin posed by an amateur. Its head was tilted at an odd angle, as though it were listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. And when it turned toward us, my stomach dropped. It was Vincent's face, but wrong. The features were all there but arranged slightly off, like a photograph that had been cut up and reassembled by someone who'd never seen the original. The smile was too wide, stretching across the face in a way that made my skin crawl. And the eyes, God, the eyes were the worst part. They were Vincent's eyes, but they held something else, something hungry and alien that made every instinct in my body scream to run. "Vincent?" Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. The thing wearing Vincent's face took a step toward us, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by someone who'd never learned how to make it walk properly. Its arms swung stiffly at its sides, and its head stayed tilted at that unnatural angle. I grabbed both Grace and Sam, pulling them backward. "Run," I whispered. "Run now." We turned and bolted back toward the cabin, branches whipping at our faces, the ground seeming to shift and roll beneath our feet. Behind us, I could hear something following, footsteps that were too heavy, too irregular to be human. We burst through the cabin door like we were being chased by demons, which maybe we were. The familiar space of the living room felt like a sanctuary, but even as we slammed the door and threw the bolt, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Whatever was out there, it wasn't bound by normal rules. "What was that?" Sam gasped, his face pale and streaked with tears. Before I could answer, we heard Vincent's voice from the kitchen. "What's all the commotion about?" He emerged from the doorway, rubbing his eyes as though he'd just woken up, looking perfectly normal, perfectly human. We stared at him in shock, speechless. He was Vincent, the real Vincent, not the twisted version we'd seen in the woods. His eyes held their usual warmth. His smile was natural and concerned, not the horrible rictus we'd witnessed by the tree. But if he was here, then what had we seen out there? "We saw you," I managed to choke out. "In the woods, by the hollow tree." Vincent's expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face and his eyes darted to the windows. For a moment, it looked like he might deny it, make up some rational explanation. But then his shoulders sagged, and I saw real fear in his eyes. "Lock everything," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Every door, every window. Don't make a sound." The transformation in him was complete. Gone was the confident teenager who'd been leading our adventures all week. In his place was someone who understood exactly what kind of danger we were in. We scrambled to follow his instructions, racing from room to room, checking every possible entry point. The cabin had never felt so fragile, so exposed. The walls were just wood and glass, nothing that could really keep out something determined to get in. Vincent grabbed the old hunting rifle from behind the door, his hands shaking as he checked to make sure it was loaded. "What is it?" Grace whispered, her earlier bravado completely gone. "What's out there?" Vincent looked at her, then at Sam and me, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't know," he admitted. "But it's not the first time." The admission hung in the air like a physical weight. Not the first time. That meant this had happened before. That whatever was out there had been waiting, watching, perhaps for weeks or months or longer. The thought made my skin crawl, the idea that we'd been playing and laughing and exploring while something monstrous lurked just beyond our sight. Outside, the forest had fallen into complete silence. No wind, no insects, no night sounds of any kind. It was as though everything natural had fled, leaving only us and whatever was stalking us in the darkness. Night fell completely, and with it came the voices.
下邊咧就會 freeze 曬嘅，但係咧呢啲我會攞翻做即係呢個位咧呢個框位喐緊，因為嗰啲會照攞翻咯。咁但係車位咧就唔攞啦，咁樣就係咯。跟住呢個慢少少嘅呢個就呢個，因為佢永遠都係 freeze 咗呢個位咯。拍片嘅，好似 rap 緊到 rap 成廿秒。It was our mother's voice calling like she did when it was time for dinner. Come outside, sweetheart. 夠啦，跟住之後攞埋呢兩碌柱先，我要。
Grace's face went white.
唔係，照唔 cut 啦，照攞咋係咯，跟住之後嗱攞埋碌柱扮。
Mom's 300 miles. But the voice was perfect, exactly right down to the slight rasp Mom got when she was tired. It called again, more insistent this time. "Grace, honey, what are you doing in there? Come out right now." The tone was shifting, taking on the edge Mom got when she was getting angry, when punishment was coming if we didn't obey immediately. Then Sam's name joined the chorus, called in Dad's voice. "Samuel, you get out here this instant. You know better than to hide from me." Sam was shaking now, tears streaming down his face. The voice was perfect, capturing Dad's disappointed tone exactly, the one that meant we were in real trouble. Vincent appeared at my shoulder, the rifle clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "Don't listen. he hissed. "Whatever it is, it's trying to get us to open the door. It's learning from us, copying the voices it thinks will work." But even as he spoke, I heard my own name being called in Vincent's voice, though Vincent was standing right next to me. The voices multiplied, overlapping and contradicting each other. Sometimes it was Mom calling for Grace. Sometimes it was Dad demanding Sam come outside. Sometimes it was Vincent calling my name with increasing desperation. But then other voices joined in. Voices of teachers, friends, relatives, all of them begging and demanding and threatening, all of them trying to convince us to step outside. The worst part was how real they sounded. Not just the voices themselves, but the emotions behind them. I could hear genuine concern in Mom's voice, real anger in Dad's, authentic fear in the version of Vincent that was calling to me. Whatever was out there had studied us, learned not just how our family sounded, but how we related to each other. As the hours dragged on, the voices grew more sophisticated, more personal. They began referencing specific memories, inside jokes, private conversations. Mom's voice told Grace about the time she'd broken the lamp and never confessed. Dad's voice reminded Sam about the promise he'd made about cleaning his room. It was as though our own memories were being turned against us. "How does it know these things?" Grace whispered, covering her ears with her hands. Vincent looked grim, his eyes never leaving the windows. "I don't know," he said, "but it's been watching us, learning." The thought that we'd been observed, studied, cataloged like specimens made my stomach turn. The voices continued for hours, rising and falling like a twisted symphony. Sometimes they would stop completely, leaving us in that suffocating silence, and we'd begin to hope it was over. But then they would start again, more insistent than before, more desperate. Around what I guessed was midnight, they changed tactics. Instead of calling from outside, the voices seemed to come from inside the cabin itself. We'd hear Mom's voice from the kitchen, or Dad's from the bedroom, always just around the corner, always just out of sight. Vincent had us stay together in the living room, but the voices followed us even there. "I'm right here," Vincent's voice said from the corner of the room, though Vincent was sitting next to me. "Why won't you come to me?" The voice was hurt, confused, with just the right note of betrayal. If I hadn't been looking directly at the real Vincent, I might have believed it. Sam was the worst affected. At 11, he didn't have the same ability to rationalize what was happening. The voices of our parents calling to him were torture, and several times he tried to go to the door before we could stop him. "They need me," he sobbed. "They're scared. I have to help them." "It's not them," I kept telling him, holding him close. "Mom and Dad are safe at home. This is something else. Something that wants to hurt us." But even as I said it, I wondered how long any of us could hold out against this psychological assault. Vincent told us what he could during the brief quiet periods. His family had been coming to this cabin for generations, and there had always been stories. Hunters who disappeared near the hollow tree. Hikers found days later with no memory of where they'd been. Children who wandered too far into the woods and came back. Different. "My grandfather used to say something lived in these woods," Vincent whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something old and hungry. He said it could wear faces like clothes, become whatever it needed to be to get close to people." The idea was terrifying, but it explained what we'd seen, what we were hearing. As dawn approached, the voices gradually faded. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on us all night began to lift, and for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe properly. Vincent lowered the rifle, his arms shaking from holding it ready all night. "It's over," he said, but his voice held no relief, only exhaustion and dread. For now. Through the windows, pale morning light was beginning to filter through the trees, and the forest looked normal again, peaceful even. But I knew I'd never see it the same way. We didn't discuss what had happened. What was there to say? That something inhuman had spent the night trying to lure us to our deaths using the voices of our loved ones? That we'd seen Vincent's face on something that definitely wasn't Vincent? That we were trapped in a nightmare that felt all too real? Instead, we focused on getting out. Vincent went to get the car keys from his room, but returned empty-handed, his face pale. "They're gone," he said simply. We searched the entire cabin, but the keys were nowhere to be found. Vincent was certain he'd left them on his dresser, but now they were simply gone. "It took them," Grace said, and none of us argued. The thing in the woods didn't want us to leave. It wanted us to stay, to play its games, to eventually make the mistake that would let it get close enough to... what? We didn't want to find out. We spent the morning fortifying the cabin as best we could, moving furniture against the doors, checking and rechecking the windows. Vincent tried the old radio, hoping to call for help, but it produced nothing but static. We were truly alone. It was Sam who spotted them first. "Look," he said, pointing out the window toward the tree line. There, standing just visible among the trees, were figures. From a distance, they looked like people, but there was something wrong with the way they moved, the way they stood. Too stiff, too unnatural. As we watched, more appeared. Dozens of them, all standing perfectly still, all facing the cabin. Some looked like Vincent, some like us, some like people I didn't recognize but who felt familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching us with those wrong eyes. "How long have they been there?" Grace whispered, but none of us had an answer. They could have been there all morning, or all week, or longer. They could have been watching us every day we'd been playing in the woods, learning from us, copying us, waiting for their moment. Vincent made the decision for all of us. "We're leaving," he said. "On foot, through the woods, back to the main road. It's 15 miles, but we can make it if we stay together." The alternative was staying in the cabin and hoping someone would eventually come looking for us, but after last night, that seemed like a death sentence. We gathered what supplies we could carry, filled our water bottles, and prepared to make our run. Vincent took the lead with the rifle. I took the rear to watch for followers, and Grace and Sam stayed between us. As we opened the door, the figures in the tree line didn't move, but I could feel their attention like a physical weight. We made it to the main road as the sun was setting, exhausted and dehydrated but alive. A passing truck picked us up, and the driver didn't ask many questions about why 4 kids were hiking alone in the middle of nowhere. We told our families we'd decided to cut the trip short, that Vincent had gotten homesick. But I still dream about those woods sometimes. I dream about the hollow tree and the thing that wore Vincent's face. I dream about the voices calling to me in the dark, promising everything would be okay if I just opened the door. And sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night, I think I hear familiar voices calling my name from the shadows. I know it's just my imagination, just the lingering trauma of those few terrible days. But I never answer, and I never look back. Because somewhere deep in those dark woods, past the hollow tree, something is still waiting, still watching, still learning how to be human. And maybe, just maybe, it's gotten better at it. The first thing you should know about me is that I never planned to become an adventurer. My name is Emily Chen, and until a month ago, I was living a perfectly ordinary life as a software engineer in San Francisco. I had a small but comfortable apartment, a steady job at a tech startup, and a rescue cat named Pixel. My idea of excitement was trying a new coffee shop or attending a local tech meetup. Adventure, as far as I was concerned, was best experienced through the pages of a book or the screen of my laptop. But life has a funny way of upending our carefully laid plans. It all started with a phone call from my estranged uncle, Robert Chen. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since he'd had a falling out with my parents and disappeared into the wilderness of Alaska. The last I'd heard, he was living off the grid in a cabin somewhere near Denali National Park. "Emily," his voice crackled over the line, sounding distant and urgent. "I need your help. It's about your grandfather's legacy." I frowned, confused. My grandfather had passed away when I was just a child. And as far as I knew, he hadn't left much of a legacy beyond some old photos and a collection of vintage watches. "What are you talking about, Uncle Robert?" I asked, my fingers absently stroking Pixel's fur as she lounged on my lap. "There's no time to explain everything over the phone," he replied, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "You need to come to Alaska as soon as possible. I'll explain everything when you get here." I wanted to argue, to tell him that I couldn't just drop everything and fly to Alaska on a moment's notice. But something in his voice stopped me. It was a mix of urgency and fear. That wasn't like the Uncle Robert I remembered. "All right," I found myself saying, much to my own surprise. "I'll see what I can do." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. Pixel meowed softly, sensing my unease. "What have I gotten myself into, Pix?" I murmured, scratching her behind the ears. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I requested an emergency leave of absence from work, citing a family crisis. My boss, understanding but clearly annoyed, granted me 2 weeks. I arranged for my neighbor to look after Pixel, packed a bag with warm clothes — I'd heard Alaska could be brutally cold, even in the summer — and booked a flight to Fairbanks. As the plane took off from San Francisco International Airport, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a huge mistake. What did I know about surviving in the Alaskan wilderness? I was a city girl through and through, more comfortable navigating lines of code than hiking trails. And yet, here I was, flying into the unknown, all because of a cryptic phone call from an uncle I barely knew. The flight to Fairbanks was long and uneventful. I tried to distract myself by reading a book on my Kindle, but my mind kept wandering back to Uncle Robert's words. What did he mean by my grandfather's legacy? And why did he sound so scared? Fairbanks greeted me with a crisp, cool breeze that made me glad I'd packed my warmest jacket. As I collected my luggage, I scanned the crowd for Uncle Robert, but he was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I spotted a grizzled old man holding a sign with my name on it. "You Emily Chen?" he asked as I approached, his voice gruff but not unkind. I nodded, suddenly feeling very small and out of place. "Name's Jim. Your uncle sent me to pick you up," he said, grabbing my suitcase before I could protest. "It's a long drive to where we're headed. Hope you're ready for an adventure, city girl." As we walked to his battered pickup truck, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd gotten myself into. This was so far out of my comfort zone that I might as well have been on another planet. But there was no turning back now. The drive out of Fairbanks was beautiful, I'd never experienced before. The landscape was vast and broad, with dense forests giving way to sweeping tundra. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist. It was awe-inspiring and more than a little intimidating. Jim wasn't much for conversation, which suited me fine. I was too busy trying to take in the scenery and calm my growing nerves. After what felt like hours, we turned off the main road. Its way deeper into the wilderness. "Your uncle's place is just up ahead," Jim said, breaking the silence. "Strange man, your uncle. Been living out here for years, barely comes into town. Whatever he's got you mixed up in, be careful." Before I could ask what he meant by that, we rounded a bend and I saw it. Uncle Robert's cabin. It was larger than I'd expected, a 2-story log structure nestled against a backdrop of towering pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, and I could see a figure moving behind one of the windows. As Jim pulled up in front of the cabin, the front door swung open, and Uncle Robert stepped out onto the porch. He looked older than I remembered, his hair now more gray than black, his face lined and weathered. But his eyes were the same, dark and intense, filled with a mixture of relief and worry. "Emily," he called out as I climbed out of the truck. "Thank God you're here. We don't have much time." I thanked Jim, who gave me one last concerned look before driving off, leaving me alone with my uncle and a growing sense of unease. "Uncle Robert," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? Why did you call me here?" He glanced around nervously, as if expecting to see someone watching us from the trees. "Not out here," he said, ushering me inside. "It's not safe. I'll explain everything, I promise. But first, we need to get you settled in." As I followed him into the cabin, lugging my suitcase behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into something much bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. My ordinary life in San Francisco seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the looming mystery of my grandfather's legacy and the palpable fear in my uncle's eyes. The inside of Uncle Robert's cabin was a curious blend of rustic charm and high-tech equipment. The walls were lined with bookshelves crammed with volumes on a wide range of subjects, from Alaskan wildlife to advanced physics. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the living room, casting a warm glow over the space. But what caught my eye was the array of computers and scientific instruments that occupied a large desk in the corner.
Zoom out.
Make yourself comfortable.
Прицеп.
Uncle
Харли
Robert
Дэвидсон едет на
said,
прицепе.
gesturing to a
Жена на
large,
старой
cozy
машине
armchair.
везет его на прицепе,
All
а он на Харли
As he busied
Дэвидсон.
himself in the small kitchen area,
Так
I
проедет,
took the
да?
opportunity to look around. My gaze was drawn to a series of maps pinned to one wall, covered in cryptic symbols and notations. Next to them hung a faded photograph of a man I
Мне, Алён,
recognized as my
так эта
grandfather,
видеокамера нравится.
standing in front of what looked like an ancient stone structure. Uncle Robert returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea. He handed one to me before settling into the chair opposite mine, his face grave. "Emily," he began, his voice low and intense. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound incredible. Impossible, even. But I need you to listen with an open mind. Your grandfather, our family, we're part of something much bigger than you can imagine." I sipped my tea, trying to calm my nerves. "What do you mean, Uncle Robert? What does this have to do with Grandpa's legacy?" He took a deep breath. "Your grandfather wasn't just an archaeologist, he was part of a secret society, one that's existed for centuries. They call themselves the Custodians of the Veil." I couldn't help but laugh nervously. "The Custodians of the Veil? Uncle Robert, this sounds like something out of a fantasy novel." His expression remained deadly serious. "I know how it sounds, Emily, but it's real. The veil they speak of isn't a physical thing. It's the barrier between our world and something else. Something ancient and powerful." I set my mug down, my head spinning. "I don't understand. Are you saying Grandpa was involved in some kind of cult?" Uncle Robert shook his head vehemently. "Not a cult. A group dedicated to protecting humanity from forces beyond our understanding. Your grandfather was a guardian, tasked with safeguarding one of the nexus points, places where the veil is thin, where things can slip through." I stood up, pacing the room. This was too much. "Uncle Robert, I'm a software engineer. I deal in logic, in code. What you're saying, it doesn't make any sense. I know, Emily. I didn't believe it at first either. But I've seen things. Things that defy explanation." He reached for a leather-bound journal on the coffee table and handed it to me. "This was your grandfather's. Read it. It will help you understand." With shaking hands, I opened the journal. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat handwriting, interspersed with diagrams and sketches. As I skimmed through it, I saw references to ancient artifacts, ley lines, and entities with unpronounceable names. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, looking up from the journal. Uncle Robert's face darkened. "Because the veil is weakening. The nexus point your grandfather guarded. It's becoming unstable. And there are those who would exploit this, who would tear down the veil entirely, not understanding the catastrophe it would unleash." I sank back into my chair, my mind reeling. "And you think I can help?" "Uncle Robert, I'm not equipped for this kind of thing." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You are, Emily. More than you know. The ability to sense the veil, to interact with it. It runs in our family. Your grandfather had it. I have it. And I believe you do too." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "This is insane. You're talking about magic, about monsters. These things don't exist, don't they? Uncle Robert stood and walked to his desk. He returned with a small, intricately carved stone box. "Open it," he said, placing it in my hands. Hesitantly, I lifted the lid. Inside was what looked like a simple compass, but instead of cardinal directions, its face was marked with symbols I didn't recognize. As I touched it, the needle began to spin wildly. "That's a veil dial," Uncle Robert explained. "It reacts to the presence of veil energy, and right now it's going crazy because of you." I stared at the spinning needle, a chill running down my spine. Part of me wanted to throw the veil dial across the room, to run out of the cabin and never look back. But another part, a part I barely recognized, was fascinated. "What do you need me to do?" I heard myself asking. Uncle Robert's shoulders sagged with relief. "We need to stabilize the nexus point. Your grandfather left clues, a series of riddles that lead to the artifacts we need. But time is running out. The ones who want to tear down the veil, they're closing in." I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "Okay," I said finally. "Where do we start?" Uncle Robert smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "With this," he said, pulling out an old yellowed piece of paper. On it was written a cryptic verse. "Where earth meets sky in eternal dance, seek the stone that gleams like frozen fire. In the shadow of the sleeping giant, the first key awaits the worthy aspirant." "This is the first clue," Uncle Robert explained. "We need to decipher it and find the artifact it points to. Are you ready for this, Emily?" I looked down at the veil dial in my hand, its needle still spinning frantically. Then I thought of my quiet life in San Francisco, of lines of code and predictable routines. Something had called me here, something I didn't understand but couldn't ignore. "I'm ready," I said, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. As night fell over the Alaskan wilderness, Uncle Robert and I bent over maps and ancient texts, trying to unravel the mystery my grandfather had left behind. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of adventure and danger. Little did I know, our quest was about to take us deep into the heart of Alaska's wildest regions, where the line between myth and reality blurred, and where I would discover strengths I never knew I possessed. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the Alaskan sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I awoke feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. We had spent most of the night poring over maps and my grandfather's journals, trying to decipher the first clue. As I made my way downstairs, the smell of coffee and bacon greeted me. Uncle Robert was in the kitchen, looking as if he hadn't slept at all. "Good morning," he said, sliding a plate of breakfast towards me. "Eat up. We've got a long day ahead of us." I sat down at the small kitchen table, my mind still whirling with everything I'd learned. "Did you figure out the riddle?" I asked between bites of scrambled eggs. Uncle Robert nodded, spreading out a topographical map on the table. "I think so. Where earth meets sky in eternal dance. That's got to be referring to the mountains. And the sleeping giant? That's what the local Athabascan people call Denali." I leaned in, studying the map. Denali, formerly known as Mount McKinley, was the highest peak in North America. Its massive form dominated the landscape of central Alaska. "So we're heading to Denali?" I asked, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through me. "Not quite to the mountain itself," Uncle Robert replied. "The clue mentions the shadow of the sleeping giant. I think we're looking for a specific spot in Denali's shadow. There's an area here," he pointed to a spot on the map, "where an unusual geological formation has been reported. Locals call it the frozen flame, because of the way the rocks catch the light." I nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. "The stone that gleams like frozen fire, that has to be it." "Exactly," Uncle Robert said, a hint of pride in his voice. "We'll drive as far as we can, but we'll have to hike the last few miles. It's rugged terrain, Emily. Are you up for it?" I thought about my sedentary lifestyle in San Francisco, my most strenuous activity being the occasional yoga class. But then I thought about the Veil dial, about the legacy my grandfather had left behind. "I'll manage," I said with more confidence than I felt. We spent the next hour packing supplies: food, water, first aid kit, camping gear. Uncle Robert also packed some items I'd never seen before. Strange devices that looked like a cross between compasses and Geiger counters, vials of shimmering liquid, and small pouches of what looked like sand but glowed faintly in the dark. "Veil detection equipment," he explained when he caught me looking. "And some protective measures just in case." Just in case of what? I wondered, but didn't ask. By mid-morning we were on the road, Uncle Robert's battered pickup truck eating up the miles. The scenery was breathtaking. Vast expanses of tundra, dense forests, and always, in the distance, the looming presence of the mountains. As we drove, Uncle Robert filled me in on more of our family history. He told me about our ancestors who had been part of the custodians of the Veil for generations, about the sacrifices they had made to keep the world safe from things beyond human comprehension. "Your grandfather was one of the best," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "He had a way of sensing the Veil that was almost unheard of. That's why they entrusted him with guarding one of the most important nexus points. And now that responsibility falls to us," I said quietly, the weight of it all starting to sink in. Uncle Robert nodded gravely. "To you, Emily, I'm getting too old for this. Your grandfather always said the gift would manifest strongly in you." I fell silent, watching the landscape rush by outside the window. The idea that I had some sort of supernatural gift was still hard to swallow. I was Emily Chen, software engineer and cat mom, not some chosen one with mystical powers. As the day wore on, the road became rougher, winding through increasingly wild terrain. Finally, Uncle Robert pulled off onto a barely visible track that led into a dense forest. "This is as far as we can go by car," he said, killing the engine. "We'll have to hike from here." We shouldered our packs, heavy with supplies and mysterious equipment. Uncle Robert took a moment to consult a compass-like device that I assumed was another piece of veil-detecting technology. "The energy's getting stronger," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "We're on the right track." The hike was grueling. The forest floor was uneven, riddled with exposed roots and hidden dips. I stumbled more times than I could count, my muscles protesting with every step. But as we pushed deeper into the wilderness, something strange began to happen. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the light filtering through the canopy. But as we continued, I couldn't deny it any longer. The forest around us seemed to be shifting. Colors became more vivid, shadows deeper. Out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw shapes moving among the trees, there and gone in an instant. "Uncle Robert," I panted, pausing to catch my breath. "Is it just me, or does something feel off?" He stopped, turning to face me with a mix of concern and excitement in his eyes. "You can feel it, can't you? The veil is thin here. What you're experiencing is the bleed-through of energies from the other side." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool forest air. "Is it dangerous?" "Not inherently," he replied, resuming our trek. "But it means we need to be cautious. The thinner the veil, the easier it is for things to slip through, in both directions." As if to emphasize his point, a sound echoed through the forest, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my heart pounding. "What was that?" I whispered. Uncle Robert's face was grim. "Nothing from this world. Come on, we need to keep moving." We picked up our pace, pushing through the underbrush with renewed urgency. The feeling of otherworldliness grew stronger with each step. The trees seemed to twist into impossible shapes, their bark shimmering with an inner light. Flowers bloomed and withered in seconds, their petals scattering on a wind I couldn't feel. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, the forest suddenly opened up into a small clearing. And there, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, was a sight that took my breath away. Rising from the forest floor was a formation of rocks unlike anything I'd ever seen. They jutted from the ground at impossible angles, their surfaces smooth and faceted like enormous gemstones. As the sunlight hit them, they seemed to ignite from within. The frozen fire. His voice filled with alarm. We approached the formation cautiously. Up close, I could see that the rocks were covered in intricate patterns, screens and spirals that seemed to be angles of the building of the upright. Now, I asked, like a whisper, Uncle Robert pulled on the thing around. Its needle was spinning wildly, faster than I'd ever seen it. Now, he said, we finally did it. He began to circle the rock formation, his eyes darting between the veil and the stones. I followed, my fingers tracing the clear, smooth surface of the rocks. As I did, I felt a strange tingling in my fingertips, as if the stone was vibrating at a frequency just beyond my perception. Suddenly, my hand brushed over a section of rock that felt different, warmer, almost alive. I paused, pressing my palm flat against it. "Uncle Robert," I called out. "I think I found something." He hurried over, his eyes widening as he saw where my hand was. "Emily," he said softly, "look at the stone." I glanced down and gasped. Where my hand touched the rock, the patterns were shifting, realigning themselves into a new configuration. As we watched, a seam appeared in the seemingly solid stone, widening to reveal a small cavity. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like starlight, was a small, intricately carved piece of obsidian. It was no larger than a playing card, but as Uncle Robert carefully lifted it out, I could feel the power radiating from it. "The first key," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "You did it, Emily. You found it." Before I could respond, that otherworldly growl echoed through the clearing again, closer this time, much closer. Uncle Robert's face paled. "We need to leave," he said urgently, carefully wrapping the obsidian key in a piece of cloth and tucking it into his pack. "Now." As we turned to flee, I caught a glimpse of something moving at the edge of the clearing. It was like a tear in the fabric of reality, a shimmering rift through which I could see something. Something with too many eyes and limbs that bent in ways that made my mind recoil. "Run!" Uncle Robert shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me back towards the forest. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces as we ran. Behind us, I could hear the sound of pursuit, a slithering, scraping noise that sent waves of primal fear through my body. As we ran, Uncle Robert fumbled in his pack, pulling out one of the pouches of glowing sand I'd seen earlier. "When I say now," he panted, "I need you to think about safety, about protection. Can you do that?" I nodded, too out of breath to speak. We burst out of the tree line onto the rough track where we'd left the truck. The sun had set, leaving us in the eerie twilight of the Alaskan summer night. "Now!" Uncle Robert shouted, skidding to a stop and turning to face the forest. I closed my eyes, concentrating with all my might on the idea of safety, of a barrier between us and whatever was chasing us. I felt a surge of something course through me, like an electric current, but somehow more. Uncle Robert flung the pouch of sand into the air. Instead of falling to the ground, it hung suspended, forming a shimmering curtain between us and the forest. Just in time, a dark, writhing mass slammed into the barrier, letting out a shriek that made my bones vibrate. "Go, go!" Uncle Robert yelled, pushing me towards the truck. We scrambled in, and Uncle Robert gunned the engine, tires spinning in the dirt before finding purchase. As we sped away, I looked in the side mirror. The shimmering barrier was fading, and through it, I could see shapes. Impossible shapes that hurt my eyes to look at, moving in ways that defied physics. I turned away, my heart pounding, as Uncle Robert drove us back towards civilization. We had the key, but at what cost? And what new dangers had we unleashed? As the adrenaline began to fade, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. There was no going back to my quiet existence in San Francisco, not now that I'd seen what lurked beyond the veil. Whether I liked it or not, I was part of this now. Part of an ancient legacy, a cosmic struggle between light and dark. And somewhere out there, 2 more keys were waiting to be found. The drive back to Uncle Robert's cabin was tense and silent. My mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had happened. The frozen flame, the key, the thing that had chased us. It all felt like a dream. Or a nightmare. As we pulled up to the cabin, I noticed something was off. The door was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. "Uncle Robert," I said, my voice tight with fear. "Did you leave the door open when we left?" His face hardened. "No," he said grimly, reaching under his seat and pulling out what looked like an antique revolver. "Stay in the car. If anything happens, drive. There's a safe house marked on the map in the glove compartment." Before I could protest, he was out of the truck, moving cautiously towards the cabin. I watched, my heart in my throat, as he disappeared inside. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Uncle Robert reappeared in the doorway, his face pale. "It's clear," he called out. "But you need to see this." Hesitantly, I got out of the truck and made my way to the cabin. As soon as I stepped inside, I could see why Uncle Robert looked so shaken. The place had been ransacked. Books were strewn across the floor, furniture overturned, and worst of all, Uncle Robert's desk had been completely destroyed, the computers smashed beyond repair. "They were looking for something," Uncle Robert said, carefully picking his way through the debris. "The key, most likely, or information about it." "Who?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "The Shroud," he replied, his voice grim. "A group dedicated to tearing down the veil. They believe that by doing so, they'll gain unimaginable power. They don't understand, or don't care, about the catastrophe it would unleash." I shivered, remembering the glimpse I'd caught of what lay beyond the veil. The idea of such things roaming freely in our world was terrifying. "What do we do now?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Uncle Robert was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the wreckage of his home. Then, with a determined set to his jaw, he turned to me. "We continue. We find the other 2 keys before the Shroud does. It's more important now than ever." He moved to a section of wall that looked no different from any other, and pressed his hand against it. To my amazement, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a small safe. Uncle Robert quickly entered a combination and pulled out a thick envelope. "Emergency funds and documents," he explained. "And this." He held up a small leather-bound book. It looked ancient, its pages yellowed and fragile. "Your grandfather's field journal," Uncle Robert said, handling the book with reverence. "It contains information about all 3 keys, including the riddles that lead to them. I kept it hidden here, separate from his other journals. Thank God the Shroud didn't find it." He handed me the journal, and as my fingers touched the worn leather, I felt a strange sensation, like a jolt of static electricity, but warmer, more alive. The feeling lingered, spreading up my arm and through my body. Uncle Robert watched me closely. "You can feel it, can't you? The connection to your grandfather, to the legacy he left behind." I nodded, unable to find words to describe the sensation. As I carefully opened the journal, my eyes fell on a passage written in my grandfather's neat handwriting. "The keys are more than mere objects. They are conduits, bridges between worlds. In the right hands, they can mend the weakening veil. In the wrong hands, they could tear it asunder. The burden of their guardianship is heavy, but it is one our family must bear." I looked up at Uncle Robert, the weight of responsibility settling over me like a physical thing. What's our next move? He smiled grimly. We decipher the next riddle, and we find the second key. But not here. The Shroud knows about this place now. We need to go somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look for us. As Uncle Robert began to pack what essentials he could salvage, I flipped through the journal, my eyes catching on another cryptic verse. In the land where ice never melts, where aurora paints the endless night, seek the cavern of whispered secrets, where the second key gleams in twilight's light. I read it aloud to Uncle Robert, watching as his brow furrowed in concentration. The land where ice never melts, he mused. That could be referring to one of the glaciers up north. And the aurora. We'll need to go even further north, possibly into the Arctic Circle. The idea of venturing into such remote, harsh terrain was daunting, but I pushed my fear aside. We had no choice. The fate of the world, quite literally, depended on us finding these keys before the Shroud did. As we loaded the truck with what supplies we could gather, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, half expecting to see another otherworldly horror, but instead, I saw a fox. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its rust-red fur a stark contrast to the green of the forest. But there was something odd about it. Its eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, and as it looked at me, I felt a strange sense of recognition. "Uncle Robert," I called out softly. "Look." He turned, his eyes widening as he saw the fox. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Looks like we've got a guide." "A guide?" I asked, confused. Uncle Robert nodded. "Sometimes, when the veil is thin, animals can be influenced by the other side. They become messengers, guides. Your grandfather used to talk about them, said they always showed up when he needed them most." As if in response to Uncle Robert's words, the fox turned and began to trot down the road, pausing to look back at us expectantly. "I guess that's our cue," I said, climbing into the truck. As we pulled away from the cabin, following the fox down the winding road, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and excitement. We were heading into the unknown, chasing ancient secrets and fleeing from dangers I barely understood. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The fox led us to a small airstrip where a bush plane was waiting, its pilot giving us a knowing nod as we approached. It seemed Uncle Robert had more allies than I'd realized. As we took off, soaring over the vast Alaskan wilderness, I watched the fox grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the forest. Ahead of us lay the Arctic, with its secrets and dangers. The second key was out there, waiting to be found. And so our journey continued, deeper into a world of magic and mystery that I was only beginning to understand. Little did I know, the greatest challenges and the greatest revelations were yet to come. The bush plane touched down on a makeshift airstrip near the edge of the Arctic Circle, the frozen tundra stretching out in all directions as far as the eye could see. Despite the constant daylight of the Arctic summer, there was a chill in the air that seeped into my bones. As we unloaded our gear from the plane, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the stark beauty of the landscape. The vast emptiness was both breathtaking and intimidating. "Welcome to the top of the world," Uncle Robert said, shouldering his pack. "The glacier we're looking for is about a day's hike from here. We should get moving." We set off across the tundra, the spongy occasionally consulting his compass and the strange veil-detecting devices he carried. I followed, my mind racing with questions. "Uncle Robert," I said, panting slightly from the exertion. "You said the Shroud wants to tear down the veil. But what exactly would that mean? What would happen?" He was silent for a long moment, his face grim. "Chaos," he finally said. "Pure, unimaginable chaos. The veil doesn't just keep things out, Emily. It maintains the very fabric of our reality. If it were to fall completely, well, the laws of physics as we know them would cease to apply. Time and space would warp and twist. And the entities that exist beyond the veil, things our minds can barely comprehend. They would pour into our world. I shuddered, remembering the glimpse I'd caught of the thing that had chased us in the forest. The idea of such creatures roaming freely was terrifying. But why would anyone want that? I asked. Power, Uncle Robert replied. The Shroud believes that in the chaos of a broken veil, they can harness energies beyond human comprehension. They think they'll become gods, but they're fools. No human mind could withstand such power. They destroy themselves and the world along with them. We walked in silence for a while, the weight of his words settling over us like a heavy blanket. The landscape seemed to stretch on forever, a sea of hardy tundra plants and scattered rocks. In the distance, I could see the looming shape of a glacier, its blue-white surface glinting in the never-setting sun. As we approached the glacier, the air grew colder, and a mist began to form around us. It swirled and eddied in strange patterns, sometimes taking shapes that seemed almost deliberate before dissolving again. The veil is thin here, Uncle Robert murmured, his eyes darting around warily. Stay close, and whatever you do, don't wander off. We began to climb the glacier, our crampons biting into the ice with each step. The mist grew thicker, and soon I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The only sound was our labored breathing and the crunch of ice under our feet. Suddenly, Uncle Robert stopped. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears, and then I heard it. A faint whisper, like voices carried on the wind. But there was something off about it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "The Cavern of Whispered Secrets," I breathed, remembering the riddle. Uncle Robert nodded grimly. "It's close, but be careful. In places like this, where the veil is thin, things aren't always what they seem." We pressed on, following the whispers. As we rounded a bend in the glacier, the mist suddenly cleared, revealing a sight that took my breath away. Before us was an enormous ice cave, its entrance a gaping maw in the side of the glacier. The ice here was different. It seemed to shimmer and shift, patterns and colors swirling just below the surface. "This is it," Uncle Robert said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "The Cavern of Whispered Secrets." As we approached the entrance, the whispers grew louder. I could almost make out words now, but they were in a language I didn't understand. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. We stepped into the cave, the ice beneath our feet glowing with an inner light. The walls were smooth and curved like the inside of a massive geode, and everywhere there were reflections. Scenes that couldn't possibly exist in our world. "Don't look too closely," Uncle Robert warned. "Those are reflections of other realities. Stare too long, and you might lose yourself." We made our way deeper into the cave, the whispers growing louder with each step. The air was thick with energy, making it hard to breathe. My skin tingled, and I could feel my hair standing on end. Finally, we reached what seemed to be the heart of the cave. Here, the ice formed a perfect circle, smooth as glass. In the center, hovering a few inches above the surface, was a small object. It looked like a piece of crystal, but it pulsed with an inner light, casting rainbow reflections across the ice. "The second key," Uncle Robert breathed. I stepped forward, drawn to the key as if by an invisible force. As I reached out to take it, the whispers suddenly crescendoed into a deafening roar. The ice beneath my feet began to crack. "Emily, wait!" Uncle Robert shouted, but it was too late. As my fingers closed around the key, the world exploded into light and sound. I felt myself falling, tumbling through space and time. Images flashed before my eyes, past, present, future, realities that never were and never would be. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I found myself standing back in the cave, the key clutched tightly in my hand. But something was wrong. The cave was silent now, the whispers gone. And Uncle Robert? I looked around frantically, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Uncle Robert," I called out, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. There was no response. I was alone in the cavern, holding a key to reality itself, with no idea how to get back or what to do next. As panic began to set in, I felt a warmth emanating from the key in my hand. I looked down and saw that it was glowing brightly, pulsing in a rhythm that felt strangely familiar. It was almost like a heartbeat. Instinctively, I closed my eyes and focused on the pulse of the key. As I did, I felt that same strange energy I'd experienced before, the power that had helped me find the first key, that had fueled the protective barrier against the creature in the forest. When I opened my eyes, I gasped. The cave around me had changed. The ice was no longer smooth and reflective. Instead, it was covered in intricate patterns and symbols, glowing with the same inner light as the key. I realized with a start that I could read these symbols. They weren't in any language I knew, and yet their meaning was clear to me. They told a story. The story of the veil, of the keys, of the delicate balance between realities. And there, hidden within the story, was a message. A message from my grandfather. "To the one who holds the key," I read aloud, my voice shaking. "The path is not easy, but you are not alone. Trust in yourself, in the power that flows through our bloodline. The veil responds to your will. Shape it, guide it, protect it. The third key lies where the forgotten dreams sleep, in the city beneath the waves. Find it, and restore the balance. The fate of all realities rests in your hands." As I finished reading, the symbols faded, leaving the ice smooth and unremarkable once more. But the key in my hand pulsed warmly, as if in acknowledgement. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I didn't fully understand what had happened or what it all meant. But I knew one thing for certain. I had to find the third key. Uncle Robert was out there somewhere, and the shroud was still a threat. The fate of the world, of all worlds, depended on me. With newfound determination, I made my way out of the cave. The Arctic landscape stretched before me, vast and unforgiving. But for the first time since this journey began, I felt a sense of purpose, of destiny. As I stepped out onto the glacier, I saw movement in the distance. For a moment I tensed, fearing it might be the shroud. But as the figure drew closer, I realized it was the same fox we had seen before, its fur gleaming like fire against the ice. It looked at me with those eerily intelligent eyes, then turned and began to trot across the glacier. I smiled despite everything. It seemed my guide had found me once again. "All right," I said to myself, clutching the key tightly. "Let's go find a city beneath the waves." And with that, I set off across the ice, following the fox into the unknown. The third key was waiting, and with it, the power to save not just our world, but all realities. My ordinary life as a software engineer in San Francisco felt like a distant dream now. I was Emily Chen, heir to an ancient legacy, protector of the veil, and my journey was far from over. The journey from the Arctic to the coast of Greece was a blur of long flights, tense layovers, and constant vigilance. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential shroud agent, every stranger a possible threat. The 2 keys we had collected so far were a constant presence, their energy a low hum at the edge of my consciousness. I had spent the journey poring over my grandfather's journal, trying to decipher the clues about the third key. The city beneath the waves had immediately made me think of Atlantis, the legendary sunken city. But surely it couldn't be that simple, could it? As our small chartered boat cut through the waters of the Aegean Sea, I couldn't help but marvel at how much my life had changed in just a few short weeks. The Emily Chen who had boarded a plane to Alaska, worried about deadlines and debugging code, felt like a different person entirely. "We're getting close," the captain called out, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves and the engine. "You sure this is where you want to be? There's nothing out here but open water." I exchanged a glance with Dr. Alara Winters, the marine archaeologist we had recruited to help us. She had been skeptical at first, but after seeing the keys and experiencing some of the strange phenomena that seemed to follow them, she had become a believer. "This is the place," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Trust me." As if in response to my words, the key in my pocket began to pulse with warmth. I pulled it out, gasping as I saw it was glowing brightly, its light piercing even the bright Mediterranean sun. Suddenly, the sea around us began to churn. The captain swore loudly in Greek, fighting with the wheel as waves rocked the boat. And then, to our amazement, the water in front of us began to part, revealing a shimmering, translucent dome beneath the waves. "Impossible," Dr. Winters breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. But I knew better. After everything I'd seen, impossible was just another Tuesday. "Take us in," I told the captain, who looked at me like I was insane but complied nonetheless. As we passed through the dome, the world around us shifted. The bright blue of the Mediterranean was replaced by an eerie, greenish light. And there, spreading out before us in all its impossible glory, was a city. Spires of crystal and opalescent stone reached towards a non-existent sky. Streets paved with what looked like mother-of-pearl wound between buildings that defied earthly architecture. And everywhere there was life. Plants that couldn't exist under the sea, strange creatures that looked like a mix of fish and mammals, and... "Are those... people?" Dr. Winters gasped, pointing at figures moving about the city. They looked human, but there was something off about them. Their skin had a faint blue tinge, and I could see gills pulsing on their necks. "The inhabitants of Atlantis," I murmured, the knowledge coming to me from somewhere deep inside, a part of me that was connected to this place. They didn't die when the city sank. They adapted. As our boat docked at what appeared to be a marina, a group of these Atlanteans approached. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their eyes large and dark, regarding us with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure adorned with intricate jewelry that seemed to be made of living coral. When he spoke, his voice was melodious, with an accent I couldn't place. "Welcome, Keeper of the Keys," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "We have awaited your arrival for many long years." I stepped off the boat on shaky legs, still trying to process everything I was seeing. "You know who I am?" I asked. The Atlantean nodded solemnly. "We have kept watch over the third key since the days of your ancestor, Elias Chen. He entrusted it to us, knowing that one day, when the veil grew thin and the balance was threatened, his descendant would come to claim it." I felt a swell of emotion at the mention of my grandfather. Even now, years after his passing, he was still guiding me, still protecting the world. "Please," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I need the key. The veil is weakening, and there are those who would tear it down completely." The Atlantean's face grew grave. "We know of the danger. The echoes of discord have reached even our secluded realm. Come, Keeper. The key awaits, but claiming it will not be easy. You must prove yourself worthy, as your ancestor did before you." As we followed the Atlanteans into the heart of their impossible city, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and trepidation. What trials awaited me? And more importantly, would I be able to overcome them? The fate of not just our world, but all realities, hung in the balance. And as the distant sound of something large moving through the waters reached my ears, I realized that our arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. The shroud was coming, and time was running out. The race for the final key was on, and the true test of my newfound powers was about to begin. Little did I know, the greatest challenge wouldn't be claiming the key, but confronting the truth about my family's legacy and my own destiny. As we delved deeper into the heart of Atlantis, I steeled myself for whatever lay ahead. I was Emily Chen, Keeper of the Keys, Protector of the Veil, and I was ready to face my destiny. The Atlantean city was a maze of crystalline corridors and chambers that seemed to shift and change as we passed through them. Our guide, who had introduced himself as Naren, led us to a vast circular room dominated by a pool of water so still it looked like a mirror. "This is the Chamber of Reflections," Naren explained, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It is here that you will face the trial of tides." I swallowed hard, trying to quell the nervousness rising in my chest. "What exactly does this trial entail?" Naren's large dark eyes regarded me solemnly. "The trial is different for each keeper. It will challenge not just your physical abilities, but your mind, your heart, and your very understanding of reality. Are you prepared to begin?" I glanced at Dr. Winters, who gave me an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to Naren. "I'm ready." As soon as the words left my mouth, the room began to change. The walls seemed to melt away, replaced by an endless expanse of ocean. The floor beneath my feet became transparent, giving the illusion that I was standing on the surface of the water. Naren and Dr. Winters had vanished. I was alone in this strange, liminal space, suspended between sea and sky. Suddenly, the water beneath me began to swirl, forming images. I saw flashes of the past. My grandfather on his expeditions, the founding of the custodians of the Veil, ancient battles against forces that defied description. The history of my family's legacy played out beneath my feet like a living tapestry. Then the images shifted, showing me visions of possible futures. I saw worlds where the veil had fallen, realities twisted beyond recognition, horrors unleashed upon an unsuspecting Earth. But I also saw hope. Worlds preserved, balance maintained, the veil strong and intact. A voice echoed around me, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Keeper of the Keys, you stand at a crossroads of realities. The choices you make will ripple across time and space. Are you prepared to bear this burden?" "I am," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The water beneath me surged upward, enveloping me in a cocoon of liquid. But strangely, I found I could breathe. As I floated in this womb-like space, I felt a presence, ancient, powerful, and undeniably alive. "Emily Chen," the presence spoke directly into my mind. "You have come far, but your greatest test lies ahead. To claim the final key, you must understand the true nature of the veil, and your role as its keeper." Suddenly, I was no longer in my body. My consciousness expanded, spreading out across realities. I saw the veil for what it truly was. Not a simple barrier, but a complex, living network that connected and separated countless realities. It was beautiful and terrifying, a cosmic tapestry of unimaginable complexity, and I saw my place within it. The keepers weren't just guardians. They were part of the veil itself. Our bloodline was woven into its very fabric, our lives and choices reverberating across realities. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm me. How could one person bear such responsibility? How could I possibly be worthy of this? "You are not alone," the presence reassured me. "Every keeper before you has faced this moment of doubt. But you have a strength within you, Emily. A strength born of compassion, of determination, of the very human desire to protect and nurture. That is why you were chosen." Images flashed through my mind, my life in San Francisco, my journey to Alaska, the challenges I'd faced and overcome. I saw myself through the eyes of others. Uncle Robert's pride, Dr. Winters' admiration, even the respect of the Atlanteans. I saw myself through the eyes of others. Uncle Robert's pride, Dr. Winters' admiration, even the respect of the Atlanteans. I saw the strength I possessed, not despite my ordinary life, but because of it. My analytical mind, my perseverance, my ability to adapt, all skills I'd honed as a software engineer, now serving me in this greater purpose. "You are ready," the presence declared. "Claim your birthright, keeper of the keys." The water around me began to swirl, faster and faster, until it formed a vortex. At its heart, I saw a glimmer of light. Instinctively, I reached out, my fingers closing around something solid. In a rush, I found myself back in the Chamber of Reflections, gasping for air. In my hand was the third key, a small, iridescent object that seemed to shift between liquid and solid as I watched. Naren and Dr. Winters were there, looking at me with a mixture of awe and concern. "You did it," Dr. Winters breathed. "Emily, are you all right?" I nodded, still trying to process everything I'd experienced. "I understand now," I said, my voice hoarse. "I know what we have to do." Before I could explain further, an alarm echoed through the chamber. Naren's face paled. "The city's defenses have been breached," he said urgently. "The Shroud has found us." My heart raced, but I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew what I had to do. "Take us to the highest point in the city," I told Naren. "Quickly." As we raced through the crystalline corridors, I could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the city. The Shroud had brought an army, and the Atlanteans were fighting back with weapons that looked like a fusion of technology and magic. We emerged onto a balcony at the top of the tallest spire. From here, I could see the entire city, and the dark shapes of Shroud vessels penetrating the dome that protected Atlantis from the ocean above. "Emily, what are you going to do?" Dr. Winters asked, her voice tight with fear. I smiled, feeling the power of the three keys thrumming through me. "What I was born to do," I replied. "I'm going to mend the veil." I held out the three keys, feeling their energies intertwine. As if responding to my will, they began to glow, brighter and brighter, until they were like 3 miniature suns. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my mind to the veil itself. I could feel it now, a vast living network that spanned realities. And I could feel the weak spots, the places where it had begun to fray. Channeling the power of the keys, I began to weave. It was like writing the most complex code of my life, but instead of a computer language, I was programming reality itself. I mended the weak spots, reinforced the boundaries between worlds, all while maintaining the delicate connections that allowed the multiverse to function. I was vaguely aware of the battle raging around me, of Dr. Winters and Naren protecting me from Shroud agents who had made it this far. But my focus remained on my task. As I worked, I felt other presences joining me, the spirits of past keepers, lending me their strength and knowledge. My grandfather was there, his familiar presence a comfort as I faced this monumental task. With a final surge of effort, I completed the weaving. The veil snapped back into place, stronger than ever. A shock wave of energy burst from me, washing over the city and beyond. I opened my eyes to see the Shroud vessels disintegrating, their occupants crying out as they were banished back to their own reality. The dome over Atlantis shimmered, reinforced by the power of the mended veil. As the last echoes of battle faded, I turned to Dr. Winters and Naren, a tired smile on my face. "It's done," I said simply. In the days that followed, as we helped the Atlanteans rebuild and said our goodbyes, I had time to reflect on my journey. I was no longer the same Emily Chen who had left San Francisco just a few weeks ago. I was the keeper of the keys, the guardian of the veil, protector of realities. But I was also still me, a software engineer who enjoyed a good cup of coffee and scratching her cat behind the ears. And I realized that was the point. The strength to bear this responsibility came not from some mystical power, but from my very humanity. As our boat cut through the waves, leaving the hidden city of Atlantis behind, I looked out at the horizon. The world seemed bigger now, filled with more wonder and mystery than I'd ever imagined. And I was ready to face whatever came next. Uncle Robert was waiting for us at the dock, having found his way back after our separation in the Arctic. As I hugged him tightly, I felt a sense of completion. My family, my legacy, my destiny, all had led me to this moment. "What now?" Dr. Winters asked as we drove away from the coast. I smiled, feeling the comforting weight of the keys in my pocket. "Now, we keep watch, we protect, we live." And so, as we drove back towards the familiar streets of my old life, I knew that everything had changed, and yet nothing had. I was Emily Chen, software engineer and keeper of the keys. and my greatest adventure was just beginning.